Quick warning. Some of the stories in this video may contain subject matter that some viewers may find sensitive, and as always, viewer discretion is advised. And if you have a true story you want to send my way, go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And of course, thank you. I've been a trucker for many years now, hauling just about everything from local department store merchandise to dangerous chemicals, and even items for the government that I had to be cleared for. I've been working for the same company for about 15 years at the time of the story, so I was a senior driver. I helped on the training side of things, did my share of ride-alongs to make sure the newbies were up to it, following the road laws and company rules. Because of this, that also meant they trusted me a great deal too. If I did something out of the norm, it was few and far in between, and I always had a damn good reason to do it. This was especially true if I did it without running it by anyone first. I was basically one of the bosses without the title or the paycheck, but I didn't mind. And that just meant that I was looked at for help without the responsibilities of others, right? So, that's why the course of events was so strange for everyone involved. So, around the time of this story, I had been doing what we called halfway drops, where instead of going to the destination of the drop-off, I would meet another driver halfway and we would swap trailers and head back. We did this more often in the winter, since we were based up north, trying to be nice to our southern folk that aren't used to driving in our harsh winters. On this occasion, we were nearing the end of the quarter and had to get a few more drops done, and I offered to do a double where I basically just chained them together. Swap one, drop it off, pick up another, and head back. So, of course, there were times where I would stop to sleep for the night. I got to my first swap and the guy ended up arriving an hour late due to truck issues, which did set me back. Not too big of a deal though. Then I dropped that trailer off and headed out to get my last one. That one was going to be a bit longer of a drive, so I made the decision to go ahead and stop for the night, or maybe just for a few hours at least to get some sleep. I saw a sign for a rest stop coming up, and I decided that that would be my best bet. As I pulled in and parked, I radioed out that I was stopping for the night. I tried calling my wife, but it rang until it went to voicemail. I expected this though because she worked late nights, so I just figured she was still there. I decided to walk around to stretch my legs and use the restroom. As I approached the building, it looked like there were supplies in there. I could see packs of water, cigarettes behind the counter, candy. Yet the lights were off except the one emergency light, and the door was locked. Sometimes, I've seen a single person working these and they will close and lock if they go on break or something, so again, no big deal. I walked over to the restroom, and that place had not been kept up with. The doors were nearly falling off, there were no paper towels, and there was a normal bottle of hand soap sitting next to one sink, like the type you would find in your home, but it was empty, and it looked like it had been empty for a while. So, I left. I walked back over to the shop and it was still closed. There was an old, run-down-looking vending machine next to the ice box outside, which seemed to be off and had nothing in it. And it seemed to have some stuff in there, but there was a sign saying that it couldn't give change, so it could only take cards. Like hell was I gonna put my card into that thing, though, so I just said forget it. But that's also why I bring little things to snack on, in case of situations like this. So I went back to my truck, had some jerky and trail mix, and then got myself ready to sleep. As I laid there, though, I felt like something was off. I didn't feel like I was in danger or anything, but more like I was supposed to be somewhere or not be somewhere, or almost like when you're forgetting something but cannot remember what. Just in case my feeling was off, I made sure the doors were locked and that my trusty baseball bat was nearby. I ended up falling asleep though and woke up on my own. I had an alarm on my phone, but something caused me to be jolted awake. Again, I looked around. Everything seemed normal, and nothing was disturbed. I used the restroom once more and headed out, not thinking anything of the situation. I called back out, making a joke, and said that I was back on the road, and continued on. I was probably about an hour, max, into the drive, and when I started getting all kinds of missed calls and text alerts on my phone, and several callouts and pages from the radio. I picked up the radio to ask them what was going on, and my boss started going off, asking me where I'd been, what I was doing, things like that. It started getting out of hand, so I ended up pulling over to find out what the hell was going on. First, I called my boss to see what happened. I will say that our actual trucks have trackers on them, so they can get our locations, especially since we sometimes transfer government and high-targeted supplies. This also helps in situations where we may end up somewhere that we're not supposed to be, to see if someone's doing something wrong, or if we might be in trouble. This is where the trouble started for me. They saw me pick up the new trailer and drive for a while, and then they said they got a garbled radio message from me, but when they asked me to repeat, they didn't get anything back. They tried reaching out to me again and said that it sounded like someone was just whispering into the radio, and then they got nothing from me. However, they also got notified that my tracker was offline. This has now caused concerns because they didn't know what I said, if I was in trouble, and they had no idea where I was. So they tried calling my cell phone, and when it went straight to voicemail, they called my wife. She checked her messages and saw that she had a missed call from me, and when she checked the voicemail, it was just static and sounded like someone whispering again, but she couldn't make out what was being said. Between my voicemail and my work calling her, she was a bit worried and tried calling me, but got the same thing. She didn't even get a response to her texts. To everyone else, I had just disappeared, and they had no way to trace me other than having people drive to the location and follow the road back to look for me. And, let's face it, law enforcement had plenty of other more important things to do. So I told them I was fine and that I had been. I explained that I ended up at a rest stop between these mile markers, and explained what it looked like. I apologized for getting everyone worked up, including my wife, because that was a storm alone, calming her down. And I told them I was en route to the destination as normal. Once I arrived at the drop-off, I reached back out, letting work and the wife know that I was heading back without any plans of stopping, unless it was for gas or food. However, my boss Agatha called me and was asking me about this stop that I went to. I explained to her again where it was approximately located and what it looked like, and she said that she couldn't find any rest stops in that area. Agatha's been there for just about as long as I have, so she knew that I wasn't fooling around, but was more so worried about the area or if there were scramblers or something, as it could put me or other truckers in danger. I teased her, saying that if she didn't believe me, I could always stop at it again and take pictures to get a better location, but she said not to worry about it. So I headed back out, so I could get home for a few days to my wife and my bed. On my way back, though, it really did start to bother me about this location. With everything looking so ancient, no one being at the actual little shop, and just getting an off feeling, I wanted to find this place again. Like I said, I've been doing this for a while, so I'm used to these roads and directions outside of Google. I saw the exit, and I decided to make a quick stop before finishing my drive. I did call into the radio and told them I was making a quick stop, and unlike last time, I got a response saying they got the message, basically. However, once I took the exit, the road seemed to go on longer than I remembered. Thinking to myself, maybe it's just because I'm coming from the other side and this side is longer? Except there was nothing else but the road. It just stopped. The concrete and all. There was a huge overgrown field on the side, but there was nothing there. No building, no shop, no restroom, no vending machine, not even a sign showing what the place was called. I was at a loss for words and explanation. I stayed here less than 12 hours ago, and it was all missing. I looked around to see if I was missing something, but there was nothing. I even had a signal, and I had called my wife as I stood in the field, explaining to her what was going on. She told me that she wasn't comfortable with the situation, and asked me to just leave and get back as soon as possible. What she says goes, so I was off. I snapped a quick photo of the exit ramp and the field as a memory, but that's all I had to give an explanation. Now, I wish I would have used that vending machine after all. Anyways, I got back and explained everything to Agatha, and even showed her the picture of the field. No one knows what to think of this, and we all agree to make sure we get a response back from the radio before we tune out for the night. And since then, I did just that. And I also started avoiding rest stops that I was unfamiliar with. This one dimension is enough for me. I did not have the greatest life in my 20s and part of my 30s. After high school, my parents forced me into going into college. The problem with that, though, was I had no interest in college, nor did I have even the slightest clue of what I wanted to major in or what interested me. Their solution was to force me into what my dad did, which was electrical engineering. Needless to say, I couldn't grasp it. I struggled through it, and since I wasn't getting the grades they wanted, they threatened to stop paying for it, and shortly after, they followed through. I was hardly making enough money to pay rent because, of course, I couldn't live with them, so there's no way I could afford tuition, so I dropped out. Things only got worse from there. I lost my job, couldn't find another, and I couldn't pay for rent anymore, so I started couch hopping between the few friends that I had. It was not the place to be. I hated it, and it caused severe depression. Not having money to do things yourself, not being able to support yourself, and being a third wheel really dug at me, so I had to make a change. One of my friends that I stayed with was becoming, and even then became, a diesel mechanic, so he got me a job with him. I wasn't a mechanic, but I was basically their assistant. I would get the tools, fluids, sweep things, just stuff like that. However, over time, I found myself interested in the rigs, so I watched the mechanics, I got to know the drivers, and even went on a few rides with them. It was honestly great. It was the most fun that I'd had in a long time. This caused me to get my license for driving, and eventually, I became a trucker myself, and I love it. Sorry for the long intro here, but I wanted to explain my background some to better understand the reason for my decisions. Because of this, I've become a very forgiving and giving person. I hate seeing people down on their luck, because I've been there. So I always try to help where I can, and that includes picking up people that need a ride, helping people on the side of the road, things like that. It has definitely gotten me in trouble before, but I have a few here that I will always remember. I was about midway to my destination when I stopped at a little diner to eat. I noticed there was a younger-looking girl in one of the booths near the back. She looked rough. Her hair was a mess, like it hadn't been brushed. She was wearing an old hoodie that looked dirty and had holes in it, and the hood looked like it was almost torn off. The only thing she had in front of her was a glass of water and lemons, and had asked the waitress about sides she could get instead of a whole meal. That is the kind of thing that just hurts me to see. She'd obviously been through something, and I felt the need to reach out. I noticed that she had a side of grits, so I asked the waitress to order a stew for her. When she brought it to her, she pointed to me and the girl started crying. She grabbed her meal, and she came and sat with me to finish it, and she thanked me. We talked for a while, and I learned that she was trying to start her life over. She reminded me of myself back then, which made me want to help more. I asked her where she was heading, and she wanted to go further west, because she had friends there that could help her. That happened to be where I was heading, so I offered to take her as far as I could. This seemed to cheer her up, so after finishing our meals, we headed back to my truck, where I gave her an extra bottle of water, some protein bars, and an extra coat I had, just in case. We got settled in, and we headed out. The ride started out fine. We had some small talk about what we liked. I told her a bit about my past, and I told her that I understood her thought process, and I thought that she did the right thing. If it made her happier, of course. She looked at me squinting like she was confused or suspicious at first, and said, "Why would you say that?" I was confused, but I just mentioned what she had told me earlier, and said that she deserved to be happy. She then seemed to question me and asked if I knew her or her parents, or if I was sent by them. I tried explaining to her that I had no idea who she was past what she's told me, and that I definitely did not know her family. She then got quiet, and when I looked over at her, she looked like she was about to cry. Something was definitely wrong here, but I didn't know what to do or say. After a few seconds of silence, I tried apologizing, saying that I didn't mean to worry her or upset her, just that I was happy that she was finding happiness too. That's when she started bawling. I let her get it out as I drove in silence, and then she seemed to start having a conversation with herself. And the talking seemed to be in slightly different tones. Like one was calming while the other seemed angry. This is what I remember, but it's probably not verbatim since it's been a few years.
He's just being nice. He gave you stuff without asking for anything in return. But wait till he gets there and demands repayment. He wouldn't do that. He's different, I can tell. Oh, bullshit. That's what you said about Bob. The minute he arrives, he'll ask you for a favor or turn your ass in a heartbeat. No! He wouldn't. He doesn't know what happened. Oh, yes, he does. I can tell.
Now, I first thought that she was talking to me, but when she didn't respond to me saying, "Sorry?" and just continued on, I didn't know what else to do but let it play out. So I did. After this went on for a few, she cupped her ears and yelled, "Stop!" scaring me. So I pulled over and asked if she was okay, and if she needed to go to the hospital or something, and she said no. I tried comforting her to say that I was just doing this to be nice. I didn't want anything in return, and I put my hand on her shoulder to comfort her, without being too hands-on. What I didn't notice was that this girl had a knife on her, and it was now being pointed at me. I put my hands up again, trying to calm her down as she continued to talk. At me, I suppose. She started saying things like,
I told you not to mess with me anymore, didn't I? This is your fault. You deserved what you got. If you would have just let me leave, we would both still be here.
So now, I was a bit worried for my safety. If it came down to it, I could probably have subdued her, but there was definitely something wrong here, and I feel like that wouldn't have helped the situation. I just sat quiet until she leaned back on her side of the seat, and I watched as she put the knife back in her pocket. I told her again that, really, I didn't want anything from her, and said that I just wanted to keep us both safe, and that I would take her anywhere she needed to go. She then told me to just drive, so that's what I did. I headed back onto the road and turned on some music to try and ease the tension and silence. After a while, she asked me if I knew the nearest hospital. I told her I could find one, and started making my way towards one. I am glad to help people, but I was so relieved when we found a hospital, and she asked me to go there. As I was pulling in, I just started saying my farewells and that I was glad to help, when she interrupted me and said,
He's dead.
I didn't know how else to respond, but I think I just said, "Oh?" or "What?" She then explained.
It's okay, though. He can't hurt us anymore.
Then she smiled, grabbed her backpack, and shook my hand as she walked into the hospital. I didn't even get her name. I don't know what she meant by that, who was dead, and any more of her story. I don't even know where she came from, so I couldn't really look up anything on her, but if what she said holds any truth, I hope that she got the help she needed, and I'm glad that she at least trusted someone to help her out. Another event that I found myself in was thankfully avoided before it could have been much worse. I drive through a lot of highways, especially late at night or early mornings when it's pretty empty, so when I see stranded people on the sides with their cars broken down, I'll try to help where I can. This time, I had one of those half-sized trailers, so it was a lot smaller than usual and easier to stop. I don't remember what state I was in, but I do remember that it was southern and it was hot. Ungodly hot. I saw a car that was on the side of the road with a guy walking back and forth behind it. I saw him far enough away to slow down and pull over in front of him. That's when he ran up to my side and said that the car seemed to be overheating, and he asked if I had any water they could use in sub of antifreeze until they got back to town. I hadn't seen another car in quite some time, so I was probably lucky to catch them, and I agreed to help. I got out of my truck and started walking over when I noticed a woman in the front seat holding a small baby. Again, really getting into my feelings since my wife had just had our first kid that year, I wanted to help. I looked under the hood and noticed that the engine was still extremely hot. He said he'd been there for a while waiting for someone to come help, but said that they were a few hours out. I figured it should have been cooled off by now, but I chalked it up to maybe it being because they were still in the sun. I started opening the reservoir to put the water in when I noticed it was full. You could see the liquid in there. At this point, the guy was over on the side by the woman, talking to her very quietly, almost in a whisper. Me, being naive though, I just told them it looked like the reservoir was full and mentioned that it might have been another problem, and I asked if any of their lights came on. He then took a minute to respond, and told me the keys were in the ignition if I wanted to check. I thought it was awkward at first when the lady was still sitting in the car with the baby, but I went around and I got in. As I tried to start it, I noticed it actually wasn't turning over. Something completely different from an antifreeze issue. I looked over at him and I noticed that while he had a very serious look on his face, she looked nervous. I told them my thoughts and headed back to the hood to see if I could test my theory. And that's when I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. Next to the shoulder was the railing, but then it went straight up to a grassy hill with trees. At first, I thought I was seeing the trees swaying, but trees don't have arms and carry weapons. I figured out what was going on here. I told them I knew what the problem was and was going to grab something from my truck. I started quickly walking back when I noticed another guy walking out from the trees, carrying a damn machete towards my truck. I quickly locked my doors and started my truck as the guy started banging on my window, demanding that I get out. I took off as quickly as I could and watched as two other guys came out from behind the trees. I later learned that this is actually a common tactic on the highway. They get someone to stop, rob them for everything they have, and then leave. Thankfully, I noticed before it was too late, but I'm still mad at myself for even falling for it. I do still try to help people where I can, but now with a wife and 2 kids at home, I'm a lot more cautious about how close I get to people. So just remember, not all truckers are these weird tough guys. Some of us just want to help and then get home safe, but also don't be as gullible and open as I was, and just be careful out there. I've been a trucker for most of my adult life. It's a fulfilling career if you like to be out on the open road, and I chose it for that exact reason. I wanted to see the country. I wanted to drive out in the middle of nowhere and just kind of be by myself. It can be lonely work, sure, but I think that's why I like it. I've never really been much of a people person. I could probably talk for hours about the psychology of why I like being alone. Probably some trauma in my childhood or something, but really, I think I'd rather just tell you about the one time I almost quit being a trucker. This happened back in the early 2000s. Somewhere around 2003 or 2004. I was in my mid-30s at the time, and I'd been driving a semi for a mid-sized shipping company for around 5 or so years. Back then, and even now, I was always super careful with how I managed myself when I was working. I never went over my hours while driving. I always slept when I was supposed to, and I made sure that I was in a good way before I got on the road. I'd seen a few truckers make some major mistakes when they were tired, and I wasn't going to end up one of them. I was also good about my caffeine intake, limiting myself to the mornings so I didn't become too reliant on it. I never drank or took any substances, and I was always super careful when out on the road. I kept my distance from other cars and just followed the laws. That all said, for some reason, there are people out there that just do not seem to understand that my giant motor vehicle takes a significant amount more distance to stop than your average car. I'll never understand why people decide they want to cut us off on the highway with almost literally no space or distance between us, or drive in what is obviously a blind spot for our truck. Apologies for rambling a bit in this story. I just want to put it out there that us truckers do our best to control our vehicles, but we do need everyone else to pay a bit more attention and be a bit more cautious when passing or driving around us. So, this specific event is one that really messed me up, for reasons that will be obvious here pretty soon. But it was also one that made no sense to me. It was early spring here in the US, and I was driving through part of the Midwest which had been particularly dry that winter. When we have dry winters here, the first rains of the spring can be particularly dangerous, as all the dried oil and grime on the road starts to seep upwards toward the surface. This causes major slick spots, almost like black ice. It had rained that morning before I got on the road, so I knew that I needed to be extra cautious when driving on parts of the highway that only have 2 lanes. I saddled up, got out onto the road, and I was driving at a good pace, when I saw a vehicle in my side view with a driver that looked agitated. I think that's the best way to put it. I saw him only for a moment when I glanced at the mirror. I noted the look on his face and braced myself for the potential of him doing something stupid. Side note, you can tell a lot by the look someone has on their face. And this includes whether or not they're going to be aggressive on the road. It's something I picked up along the way. So I knew this car was going to be trouble, and my first instinct was to just let him pass me, so I let off the gas a little bit, and I slowed down so he would have enough room to get ahead. I looked over at him as he drove by me, and much to my surprise, this guy is flipping me off and screaming something that I obviously cannot hear. I shake my head and look forward, thinking it's best to just ignore him and move on. I watch him get slightly ahead of me, but still at a point where the rear end of his van is adjacent to my truck. I thought he was going to pass way too close, but lo and behold, he tries to swerve over into me. As in, he tried to hit me with the back end of his vehicle. I see it in time and I pull slightly onto the shoulder, thinking, my God, what is this guy's problem? At this point, on this stretch of road, there really aren't any other vehicles around. It's just me and this guy, so I pull to the right, slow down a bit to let him get ahead of me a few feet, and then pull back onto the road within a few seconds. At this point, he's ahead of me by a couple of car lengths, so I assume he's going to move on and just be an idiot elsewhere. I wish that was what he did, because instead, he started hitting his brakes and slowing down. I started doing the same. There was a bit of back and forth between him and I, speeding up and slowing down, to the point where I was actually getting annoyed. Then, that annoyance turned into immediate panic and terror. Instead of just slightly slowing his car down to annoy me, he actually slammed on the brakes of his car. At this point, I was already back up to a decent speed because I didn't think much was going to happen beyond his little slow down and speed up. I slammed my brakes as best I could, and I attempted to roll to the right to minimize this collision, because that's what was going to happen. It was going to be a collision no matter what I did. As I mentioned earlier, though, the road was somewhat slick, and slamming my brakes, shifting to the side, I ended up clipping his van at an angle that caused it to flip and drag in front of me. I just did everything I could to try to control the situation, and I tried to cause minimal damage. The unfortunate truth was, there was no way for me to minimize the damage. With how we had connected, with the road conditions, and with the fact that I later learned he wasn't wearing a seatbelt, when the van flipped, he was actually thrown around to the passenger side of the vehicle, and then eventually thrown out through the broken windshield of his van. When all was said and done, I was calling the situation in, and I thought I was going to black out. I felt like throwing up and crying all at the same time. And part of me had this awful feeling like this crash was fatal. After the police got there and the medics, I talked them through what had happened. I had a very clunky dash camera that recorded footage for something like 20 minutes at a time. I made sure to stop it so I had the footage. I gave it to the police and my supervisor for their internal investigation, and I was cleared of fault for the accident, but I knew deep down in my heart that this was partially my doing. This man had some sort of manic episode or something, because he was acting irrational and crazy, and this unfortunate situation of timing left him in front of me at that exact moment. I have no idea why he was acting the way he was. I have no idea what was going through his mind when he thought it was a good idea to slam his brakes in front of me like this. But I do know that his death has weighed on my conscience since that day. I've had nightmares reliving the situation. I've lost sleep over the fact that I couldn't prevent it. And I've been actually seeing a therapist to try to get past it, because it's coming up on the 20th anniversary next year and it still eats at me. I want to end this story with a word of caution to people that drive carelessly out there. Please stop. When you get behind the wheel of your 2-ton death machine and drive like an idiot, you're putting everyone around you at risk. And I highly recommend you drop the antics when you're driving around semis, because you may feel invincible out on the road, but I can guarantee you that you're not. So this was 3 terrifying trucker stories. Stories from people who drive the large vehicles on the road and have experienced things that most of us won't. And hopefully, most of us never do. A huge thank you to those that do drive large trucks to get shipments across the country and so forth. It's not a job that I could do. I like driving on road trips, but not that much. The longest drive I think I ever did on a single day was down to Texas, unless it was part of a road trip back in 2013, I don't know. Driving down to Texas in one day it's a trip from Kansas. There's not a lot there. You go through a lot of traffic and random spots, but other than that, it's just empty. And driving kind of makes me tired, so not really my thing. I couldn't do it, so I commend you. And of course, I commend everyone who listens to this point, because, yeah, it's appreciated. And also, if you liked what you heard, consider hitting that thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel, consider hitting that subscribe button. If you're not new, hitting the subscribe button will unsubscribe you from the channel, and I hope that's not what you want to do. Please don't do that. Ouch, my pride. You can also further support by going to Patreon, hitting join down below, where for $1 a month, yada yada, early access, you get the point. Never expected, always appreciated. All that said, I hope everybody here has a beautiful day and a great weekend. And just know that I love you, I appreciate you, and you are valid, and you are important, and you are the best you that you can be. Never forget that. I'll see you on the next one. But until then, sleep well.